Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to our Constitutional Amendment Virtual Town Hall. This is a partnership with the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice and the Louisiana Budget Project. I'm going to pass it now to our founder, president, and CEO, Ashley Shelton, who will introduce us and introduce our panelists.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm so excited about tonight and so excited to talk to you guys about this upcoming election. And before we introduce our panelists, I know we had a couple of slides where we wanted to share with you the information about the about redistricting, as well as dates around the election. And so Taylor, could you advance to the first slide? There we go. So the constitutional amendments will be on the ballot November 13th, and this will be the open primary. Also, New Orleans will have their municipal primary on November 13th. But for many places across the state, this is one of a few handful of things that'll be on the ballot. Here in Baton Rouge, we will have 2 judgeships on the ballot as well as these 4 constitutional amendments. But the last day to register to vote online is October 23rd. Early voting starts October 30th through November 6th. Please, you can go to the Secretary of State website or powercoalition.org to find your polling location and also the locations for early voting. And then also to find out if you're eligible for vote by mail. We know many folks have been displaced by the storm, Hurricane Ida, and are maybe living with family members or displaced in and outside of the state. And so you are very much so eligible to request an absentee ballot. And so again, you can go to our website at powercoalition.org or the Secretary of State's website to find out additional information about being able to request an absentee ballot, especially if you've been temporarily displaced by the storm. The last day to return your absentee ballot will be November 9th. And so if you're going to vote by mail, by absentee ballot, please know that November 9th is the last day to request a ballot, and the 12th is the last day to turn that ballot in. And so again, our election is November 13th. Early voting starts October 30th through November 6th. And if you are requesting an absentee ballot, it must be requested by November 9th. And then certainly the last day to return that mail-in ballot is November 12th. Next slide, please. Also, really quickly, before we kind of jump into today's discussion with my good friends at the Louisiana Budget Project, we are excited that our state is kicking off its Redistricting Roadshow. And just as important as elections and voting in every election, having your voice heard, redistricting is a process that follows the census process, and we just had our decennial census. And redistricting is where we determine basically who has the ability to elect candidates of choice. And it happens once every 10 years. And this is about where you live, resources that come to your community, whether or not you have representation, and certainly, again, choosing a candidate of choice. And so we're asking everyone to participate in this process. The state of Louisiana just started its Redistricting Roadshow. The first roadshow event is going to be in Monroe, Louisiana, tomorrow, October 20th. And so we are excited that, that right now, simultaneously as we're doing this town hall on the constitutional amendments, we're also training more than 50 community leaders to be prepared to give testimony at the town hall in Monroe on the 20th. And that'll be followed by hearings on October 21st in Shreveport. And then it'll flow along the state from North Louisiana to South Louisiana. And that'll go through January with I think the last stop being in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so redistricting is really important. Make sure your voice is heard. Do not be intimidated. We have many resources on our website at powercoalition.org. And again, we will not only be redistricting at the congressional level, but at the state, House, and Senate, as well as the Supreme Court, as well as the Public Service Commission, our school boards, and certainly redistricting at the local parish level as well. And so please, again, for resources and additional information about redistricting, you are more than welcome to visit our website at powercoalition.org. Next slide. And again, as I've stated, why is it important for you to be involved? This will be the first time we're doing redistricting without Section 5 in place. So Section 5 of the voting rights was struck down. Shelby, the lawsuit, the landmark lawsuit, Shelby County, that actually resulted in Section 5 that helped communities or states that are in the Deep South that had issues with racial equity. And so that piece no longer exists. And so even more than ever, we need you to be able to engage in this process, have your voices heard. There's so many tools not only on our website, but across the web to be able to redistrict, to draw your own maps. And so please know Dave's redistricting app and others will be doing a lot of trainings. We also have, next slide, Taylor. We have 3 redistricting fellows that are on our team that are placed throughout the state. And right now, Lisa, she's our representative from Shreveport, but she is right now in Monroe helping to support, while Candace Baptiste is in Shreveport doing that same training to prepare folks to be able to give testimony and to draw maps and to talk about what important assets and communities of interest exist within their communities to ensure that they can draw districts that give them the opportunity to elect a candidate of choice. We also have Carlos Polar Jr. in New Orleans and Carlton Jones here in Baton Rouge. Again, our website, powercoalition.org, and you will find, if you click on their pictures on our website, their email addresses are there. And in addition to several resources, and we have taken it upon ourselves to map every part of the state so that you can easily, if you don't know Dave's redistricting app or some of the other apps that are out there to do mapping, where at least at the state level, you can look at the House and Senate maps and the demographic breakdowns following the census. And so again, please feel free to reach out to anyone on our team, but certainly our redistricting fellows that are across the state that are trying to work on the ground at the community level to make sure that as many communities as possible are supported through this process as the roadshow, again, like I said, begins tomorrow. Next slide. Well, before we get into this next slide, I thought we had one more redistricting. I would love to welcome our panelists today. I am Ashley Shelton. I am the president and CEO of the Power Coalition, and I am thrilled to be joined by Jan Moeller with the Louisiana Budget Project, and also an anchor member of the Power Coalition table, as well as Devontae Lewis, who may speak up and say a few things as well. And so, the Power Coalition is really grateful to the Louisiana Budget Project and the work that they do, the data that they offer and bring to our work. Many times it has been critical the way that they have supported us in being able to provide the data to prove what's happening to people and their lived experiences throughout this state. And so we are grateful to them. They are a key and critical partner to the work that we do every single day here in Louisiana, advocating on behalf of the citizens of this state. And I would love to welcome Jan Moeller. So, hey, Jan, as well as Devontae. And so Devontae, you may just be here to pitch it, but always a wealth of information, always a good friend and supporter. And if you're ever at the Capitol, you have met Devontae, you have seen Devontae, because he is running around that place and making sure that everybody has what they need, making sure that we can all testify, that we have the data and the support, and to make sure that, things move. And so we are really grateful to your leadership, Devontae, both at the policy level and certainly with the data and redistricting work that we're doing together as well. And so with that, I will go on and kind of open up the floor. Good afternoon, good evening, rather. How are you, Jan?
I am great, and thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate this. We're so glad to be talking about these amendments. It's a little strange, and I want to first of all just thank you, Ashley, for being an unbelievable partner for many years, long before you even started the Power Coalition. We've been working together in the trenches, but the Power Coalition is such an important table in this state to bring together groups, from various perspectives with different levels of with expertise on so many different areas, but we all have a common goal of wanting a more fair and equitable state where everybody has opportunity to thrive, where we erase and eliminate the barriers that have helped so many people back and build power in communities that really need it. So we're always honored to participate in the Power Coalition, and we're glad that you're providing this forum to talk about the amendments. And actually, I know you're going to talk about Amendment 1. This is an odd year. I mean, I want to just kind of frame this by saying, once every 4 years in Louisiana, this state that loves politics more than any place I know, you get kind of a break from elections because we don't have any federal races on the ballot. We don't have any statewide races on the ballot. We have municipal elections in New Orleans, of course, that are very hot, but for most of Louisiana, they've kind of forgotten about politics. Maybe they're paying attention to what's going on in Washington, but we have these 4 amendments. I would say 2 of them are probably not that big a deal, but 2 of them are potentially a very big deal if you care about taxes and the way we tax people in the state and the way we collect those taxes and the kind of revenue we're going to have available in the future to do the things that we need to do. So this is an important election. It's expected to be a low turnout election. And the good news about low turnout elections, it means that if you vote, that your vote actually counts more because there are fewer of you. So this is one of those elections where, a little knowledge and if you can get yourself to the polls on November 13th, you really can make a difference in this because, a lot of your fellow citizens are going to be tuned out. So we're really just trying to educate folks about what's on the ballot. And I just truly appreciate the Power Coalition for providing this forum and for, for being a partner and getting the word out about these. So thanks again, Ashley.
No, thank you, Jan. And again, I've had an opportunity to sit on the board of the budget project. And it's, in some of the earlier days in its development. And again, consider you guys, a great partner and good friends. And that's why we're doing this together. And I think, in addition to this also being one of the very few things, and we know in some areas it's the only thing on the ballot. We know, again, New Orleans has municipal elections. We know that Baton Rouge has 2 judgeships on the ballot. But for very much so, the rest of the state, there's not a lot on the ballot. We do have actually one state. There is one state office, I think, in Lake Charles that has a seat that will be on the ballot. But again, for a good part of the state, this is the only thing that's on the ballot, which is why it's important that folks show up. In the Power Coalition, we are a coalition of base building groups and other organizations that have deep content knowledge in different areas across different issue areas across the spectrum, whether it be housing, criminal justice reform, or certainly the Louisiana state budget as represented by the Budget Project and many others, to be able to really understand how these things impact communities across our state. And so, one of the reasons that we are holding this town hall today was that we were just concerned that these amendments, would go unnoticed, and that, to Jan's point, we would have, really low voter turnout because, again, there's not a lot not on the ballot. There's not a lot of talk happening about these amendments and what's going on. And so we wanted to create a platform, use our platform to be able to talk about this. And so one of the other things that I'll start with before I jump into amendment number 1 is that this is also concerning. Let's talk about the practice of just amending the Constitution. So in the state of Louisiana, we have the most amended Constitution in the country, if I'm not mistaken, Jan. And we've got to understand that, again, we are amending our state's Constitution to add these things to the Constitution. And so in order to bring these things to our ballot on November 13th, it takes a 2/3 vote of the legislature. But once these things are in the Constitution, then it, like it's there, right? I mean, it can be removed, but it certainly is a much more difficult process. And so again, let's think about one, many of these things, are changing our constitution, our state's constitution. I think the other issue, that we also, that I always talk about too, is that so many of the things that end up being amendments, can also be done legislatively or statutorily through the legislative process. And so that's another, piece of this, is that, like, why are we amending our constitution? I do think that, for the most part, there's not a lot of good reasons to do so. I will say, I had an opportunity to, and Jan and many, many others, to support Amendment 2 when we were ending the practice of non-unanimous jury, convicting folks with non-unanimous juries. And so, and so there are moments where, it rights a long time wrong in our Constitution, but for the most part, there's so many of these things that can really be done statutorily. And so let's just kind of jump in. And so I'll talk a little bit about Amendment 1, and then certainly ask Jan to add any thoughts and comments. But, Amendment 1 basically, and I'll just read it so that we have it, have it for everyone to hear. It says, do you support an amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for the streamlined electronic filing, electronic remittance, and the collection of sales and use taxes levied within the state by the state and the local streamlined sales and use tax commission, and to provide for the funding, duties, and responsibilities of that commission. And you get an opportunity to vote yes or no. A vote yes means that a new statewide commission that is untested and unelected will create an electronic filing and remittance system for all sales and use taxes. A vote no means local municipalities retain the power to collect sales tax revenue in their jurisdiction. Additionally, the current parish e-file system can be updated and adjusted to be more streamlined. So one of the reasons that we picked this particular, one of the reasons that we came out and, and are asking folks to vote no on Amendment 1 is because this particular amendment does a couple of things that are problematic. Power Coalition has always kind of spoken up and stood up against anything that kind of preempts local government or the power of local government. And this is, and one of the reasons we feel like this has some preemption, some preemption at the local level, is because we are taking power away from local governments that currently exist with them. To give it to a commission that is untested and that is unknown how and what ways that that commission will make decisions, or what this commission really is, authorized to do. When you look at who the commission will be made up of, the commission is certainly political. When you have police juries and sheriffs and different other kinds of personalities on these, on this commission, that it takes the voter one step away from being able to hold someone accountable. So at least at the local level, you can hold your mayor and your city council, your elected leadership at the local level accountable around the decisions that they make. But if you remove that one step further to a commission, then it means that it's one step further from transparency and one step further from being able to create accountability. And I think Power Coalition has been really clear that, we've been hearing a lot that this Amendment 1 is harmless and this is about good government and streamlining. But, I think good government is accountable government. And for us at the Power Coalition, we're saying vote no to Amendment 1 because we want to make sure that we have the most accountable the most accountable process ever. And the Department of Revenue can work with local municipalities and jurisdictions to actually streamline and update this software without having to create a commission that is untested and unknown, kind of what, and is also, kind of political in its makeup and nature. And so, and so we're opposing it because of its preemptive nature. And, certainly, Jan, didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that, but I mean, that has been the Power Coalition stance on this particular amendment.
Yeah, I think one of the, I think that's a great explanation. This is one of those things that was a real priority for business because right now, the state has its portion of the sales tax, and then the local governments charge their own sales tax. They have millages for police and libraries and parks and so on. And so the Department of Revenue collects the state portion, and then each parish collects the local portion. And in some parishes, that's the sheriff. It might be, a different political jurisdiction. And so they wanted to streamline that because they thought, well, if you own a business that has, maybe you operate in 10 different parishes, then you're dealing with 10 different tax collectors, and boy, isn't that cumbersome. And so they wanted to change that. And so that's what this commission is designed to address. And in theory, that's not a terrible idea. What they did with this amendment, and where I think a lot of the mistrust comes in, is they said, we want you to create this commission with the constitutional amendment, and then the legislature has to come back next year and pass the implementation language. So this is only halfway to this kind of streamlined sales tax collection system that you get. And so they're basically saying, trust us to get this right, but we want you to give us the go ahead to do this. So if you trust state government to get this right, then maybe you think this is a good idea. But I think one of the things that's raised some of the mistrust is, for example, the way that the State Bond Commission has been, withholding money for projects in the New Orleans area. They're apparently angry with the mayor over the mask mandate and some of the COVID policies. And so I think, we don't know if the paranoia is justified, but we do know that, Baton Rouge hasn't given New Orleans a lot of reasons to trust it recently. So I think, again, there probably is a good case to be made for consolidating and streamlining sales tax revenue, particularly for online vendors. If you are, Wayfair or somebody who sells online, the state can now collect sales taxes, and they certainly don't need to deal with 64 different sales tax collectors. But the fact that they left that they left the implementation to next year's legislature, I think is a cause for some real reservation.
No, for sure. And I think too, I mean, some of the folks that, if you look up who's been investing and supporting this, advertisement and other costs around telling people about this amendment, there's a lot of big business on that list. And so that's also concerning. And so when you think about Acadian Ambulance and some others that have, that are putting resources into supporting the education and information about this particular amendment, it also, it just raises questions for me as a citizen. Certainly, to Jan's point, I mean, I'm one person and you are more than welcome to come to your own conclusion. But I do think that, what Jan has said is right. And again, like I said, I mean, it doesn't, there's a preemption issue here for the Power Coalition, and we've always stood up against those issues, and whether it be raising the state preempting local municipalities around the minimum wage, or paid sick leave, or other things, we've always stood with the municipalities around these issues. And I think that again, we can all talk about good government and wanting a streamlined process, but that there are a lot of other ways to get there, and that certainly, it just makes more sense for us to have some more discussions and to really understand why we would want to put this in the Constitution before we actually have an implementation plan and we actually understand who and what this commission, who it would be accountable to and how it would work. And so with that, I think we can go to Amendment 2. Next slide, please.
All right. All right. Well, I can start on this. So this is the big so-called tax reform amendment that's on the ballot, and I want to start by saying, if you read this, not every amendment is. Sometimes these things are designed to kind of deliberately obfuscate what they actually do. And this is kind of a case study in that. So if you read the amendment, and we can read it together, do you support an amendment to lower the maximum allowable rate of individual income tax and to authorize the legislature to provide by law for a deduction for federal income taxes paid? the average person reading that is going to think, I'm going to get an income tax rate cut and I'm going to get a tax deduction. Great news. Sounds pretty simple. And in one sense, that is what the amendment does. So they're not lying about what the actual amendment does. But what this amendment also does is get 3 other bills to take effect. This is a package of 4 bills. There's the constitutional amendment and 3 other bills that were part of a package. And the 3 other bills that were not constitutional amendments only become law if this happens. So what you're really voting on when you see this very innocuous sounding language is actually a pretty complex package of tax changes that really would make some pretty fundamental changes to our tax structure in Louisiana. And so let's start from let's start with what's wrong with the current tax structure. And here's kind of how we see it at the Louisiana Budget Project. Our mission really is to create a fiscal policies and procedures that help low and moderate income families. We're a research organization, but we're not shy about saying we think that the state tax system should do as much as possible to support the needs of low income families. And so when we look at the tax structure, there are 2 basic things wrong with it. It doesn't raise enough money to support the things we need in the state. Teachers are underpaid. Our infrastructure is crumbling. Families don't have the supports that they need. And our colleges are underfunded. Kind of everywhere you look, we have early childhood. I was on a call this morning about how poorly we're doing in investing in our youngest children. So really, workforce training, you kind of name it, it's probably underfunded in state government. And so we don't raise enough money. And the Legislative Fiscal Office has actually confirmed this in multiple studies. And the money that we do raise, we raise in what's called a regressive way, which means the highest overall tax rates as a percentage of income are paid by those at the very bottom of the income ladder. And the lowest overall tax rates are paid by the very wealthy. So we have what we kind of call a regressive or an upside down tax system. And so when we evaluate a tax reform package, we ask ourselves, does it raise more revenue so that we can maybe pay our teachers enough or make some new investments? And does it make the system more fair? This tax swap fails on both of those accounts. It does not change that fundamental equation. And in fact, if this were to pass, it would make, in many ways, cement the status quo in place and make it harder to make those kind of changes that I think would drive Louisiana forward and allow us to make the investments that we need. So here's what this does. And let's start with the federal income tax deduction. And so Louisiana is one of 2 states in the entire country. Alabama is the other one that allows a federal income tax deduction. You can deduct the federal income taxes that you pay on your state returns. And that has been in the state constitution since forever. And this is actually a pretty bad tax deduction because it's one of these tax breaks. Obviously, the richer you are, the more federal taxes you pay, whether you're an individual or a corporation, and you get to deduct all that on your state return. And so this is one of those deductions that flows mainly to the very wealthiest households. And it's something that we've been very critical of at the Louisiana Budget Project for going back a decade. So the one good thing about this is it gets rid of the federal income tax deduction out of the state constitution. And that is actually a good thing. The problem is, and this federal income tax deduction is worth about $800 million a year when you count individuals and corporations. So it's a pretty big deduction. If you pay income taxes in the state, you probably take advantage of this deduction. You almost certainly do. So getting rid of this is probably a good thing. But the trade-off for that is we're cutting basically, and we're taking away a tax deduction that flows mainly to the wealthiest taxpayers, and we're replacing it with tax breaks that flow mainly to the wealthiest taxpayers and corporations. And it does so by making across-the-board cuts to personal and corporate income taxes, but the biggest cuts come at the very top rates that are paid by the wealthiest, and it cuts the corporate franchise tax. And so that's the essence of the amendment. Here are a couple of problems with it from our perspective, and frankly, there are a lot of good people at the legislature and people we work with who I just disagree with on this. But they will say that this is a revenue neutral tax plan, that it doesn't cut taxes and it doesn't raise taxes. If you look at the numbers put out by the actual legislature itself, it actually does end up reducing revenue, which means that there's less money to pay teachers, less money to invest in families. They tried really hard to make it revenue neutral, but in the end, they couldn't make it revenue neutral. So if you vote for this, you are actually making it harder to fund state government services. There are a couple of other big problems with this that I think, made it from, a minor tax cut to something that could be a big problem coming down. One is they added what is called a trigger amendment to this. And what this says is that if this passes and Louisiana's economy does a whole lot better than people expect, if we get a lot more revenues, if we have an economic boom, which we may actually be heading towards some really good economic times, because as you know, if you've lived in Louisiana for a while, the economy tends to do a lot better after hurricanes because we get a lot of cash and people are rebuilding and there's a lot of economic activity. If we get a lot more tax revenue than we expect, then this amendment calls for automatic additional across the board tax cuts. So you may be cutting taxes with this amendment, and then you may be automatically cutting taxes in the future, which means, even if we get a lot of an additional revenue, we're still not going to be able to pay our teachers or invest in higher education and so on. The second thing is that it does not prevent the legislature from reinstating the federal income tax deduction. It only takes that deduction out of the state constitution. And if you read the amendment, it says authorizes the legislature to provide by law for a deduction for federal income taxes. So they basically say, hey, we're taking it out of the Constitution. We're getting rid of this. But if you want to put it back, we're okay with that. So you may be actually getting, putting this income tax back, this income tax deduction back. And then the third thing it does is it makes it a whole lot harder to raise revenue in the future because it puts a constitutional cap on the personal income tax rate. It says it can never go above 4.75%. Now, here in Louisiana, we already make it incredibly tough. We are one of about half dozen states that says, it takes a 2/3 vote to raise taxes already, which is a very high bar that most states don't have. It only takes a majority of votes to cut health care for a poor family, to cut funding for LSU, to cut child welfare services or anything that we support in the budget. But to raise the revenue to pay for those services takes a 2/3 vote. And now we're saying if you want to raise revenue through the personal income tax, it's going to take a 2/3 vote plus a vote of the people. So it's making it very tough if future legislators want to do this to raise revenue in the future. And so again, I think this is one of those things. I know that the legislature has very good reasons for getting rid of the federal income tax deduction, but I think this is one of those things that would actually, in the long term, make it harder to raise the revenue we need. One last point I'll make on this is that, you will hear the arguments from supporters that say, well, Louisiana has a top income tax rate of 6%. And boy, if we lowered it to 4.25, we would be, lower than a lot of other southern states, and that's just going to bring in business, and people are just going to flow, move to Louisiana when they see that. That's just not supported by any evidence whatsoever. Nobody decides which state they're going to move to based on what the tax foundation puts in their rankings. This is the same story we were told 12 years ago or 15 years ago about ethics. If we can just move to the top of the ethics list, Bobby Jindal, the Center for Public Integrity, well then boy, people are going to move to Louisiana and we're going to take off like a rocket. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. Who the tax foundation says is and I always laugh at this. They say, the most friendly state in the country for corporate taxes, business friendly state in the country is Wyoming. Ask yourself how many, Fortune 500 companies are moving to Wyoming. They're not. People move to certain states, the states that can provide good economic opportunity, good education, good infrastructure, a welcoming culture that tolerates and respects everybody. Those are the building blocks of a strong economy. So I would just say, take it with a grain of salt when somebody tells you that, if we pass this and we lower the top income tax rate, we're going to usher in some period of economic growth. It's just not supported by the research. It's not supported by the facts. If we want to build our economy, we should do that by again, raising the revenue we need to make the investments that we need to allow all families to thrive. I don't know if Devontae wants to add anything, but on Amendment 2 or the others, but with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ashley. I know you want to talk about the other two.
Okay. Well, no, and I mean, and Jan, and we stand with you on this. And again, I think the biggest point again is that we're changing the state's constitution, and that again, even if they wanted to do this for a short period of time, if they wanted to think about these things, they could be done legislatively, and at the end of the day, I think that to your point, it just doesn't make dollars or cents for our state, and I remind folks that Louisiana is still one of the poorest states in the country. And so being able to have resources to be able to think about paying our teachers more money, hospitals, vital programs, and to be able to operate in the Black is a really good thing and, and a great opportunity for our state. And so we're asking folks to vote no. And again, I think that, a lot of too of what we've been hearing is that, I've seen a couple of graphics that show the average Joe, being able to bring home, a couple of $100s every year. And I think what stands out to me is that, the average Joe gets a couple of $100, but our, the largest, the folks with the largest amount of income in our state get a much larger tax rate break than the average person living in the state of Louisiana. And again, I guess it makes sense. They've got more money, so they pay more taxes, so they get a bigger cut. But I do think that, at the end of the day, nobody wants to cut taxes and then not have the resources that we need for our state to function in a thoughtful way. And I appreciate your point too, Jan, around the what happens after a hurricane, right? I mean, we've seen that, the number that's been talked about at the federal level is around over $26 billion and potential Hurricane Ida recovery dollars. And so, of course, there's going to be a boom. There's going to be an influx of resources. And we need those resources to not only restore our communities and to make people in communities that have been impacted to make them whole, but we also need those resources to be able to address issues with the infrastructure that was damaged and destroyed in these storms as well. And so, again, it's not just surplus or extra money. These are really resources resources that our communities desperately need to be able to be made whole on the other side of Hurricane Ida. And so so certainly Power Coalition stands with Louisiana Budget Project and agrees on your very astute analysis. And we took the slide down for just a second because we had the vote no answer was not correct, but we have fixed it and updated that. And so again, we're asking you in particular on amendments 1 and 2, to please vote no, because these are really critical to our state. Next slide, Taylor. I think Jan makes a good point about, there are four of these amendments that are going to be on the ballot. I will tell you that I think that, 1 and 2 are critical pieces that, that folks want to get passed, and 3 and 4 are also on there. But at the end of the day, like those first 2, change quite a bit about our state's constitution, and about also too, like who has what's best for our state. And so I think as we look at 3, to Jan's point, I always feel like I never know if I vote yes, am I voting no? If I vote no, am I voting yes? When I read through these, because the legal language is very complicated. But Amendment 3 says, do you support an amendment to allow levy districts created after January 1st, 2006 and before October 9th, 2021, whose electors approve the amendment to levy an annual tax not to exceed 5 mills for the purpose of constructing and maintaining levees, levee drainage, flood protection, and hurricane protection? A vote yes removes the control from the local area to control that levy district. A no vote requires additional mills to pay for levy districts to go to a vote of the people in that levy district. I think at the Power Coalition, and certainly the Budget Project has not taken, neither one of us has taken a stance on this particular amendment. I think it's important to talk about, again, there's been some discussion in different circles about, that this is, again, we're amending our state constitution. Do we, are levees, levee drainage, and flood protection unbelievably important? Absolutely. But this idea of, that, of the 5 levee districts that currently exist, when they took it to the voters in their, respective communities, they said no. And so now we're going to bring this to the constitutional level, to the level where we're going to actually change and put this into the state constitution. And so again, it's not to say that it's not important and it doesn't need to happen, but it certainly should always be, something that's voted on by the voters of that community about what is important and what is necessary around the ideas of levee drainage, flood protection, and hurricane flood protection. And so, again, we're certainly focused on 1 and 2, but I think it's certainly important to kind of discuss all of them and to kind of think through them. Jan, I didn't know if you had anything to add. I mean, I think that's just what, that's just the discussions we've been having in different circles.
I will be completely honest, this one completely flew under my radar during the legislative session, and I had to go read up, and I will thank my friends at PAR, the Public Affairs Research Council. I don't agree with them on number 2, but they did explain this one, and they have an explanation on their website, and we have a kind of an abbreviated explanation in the brief that I put on the link. Essentially, this only applies to 5 levy districts in the state. Nobody else would be affected. And the only way that this millage applies in those levy districts is if the people in those levy districts vote yes on this amendment. So if the entire state votes yes, but you live in one of those affected districts, I think it's like St. Tammany, Tangipahoa, I want to say Cameron or Vermilion. I mean, there's they're all in South Louisiana. And if you, but if the people in your community vote no, then this does not apply. So people do get a say, but if you vote on this and you're in one of the affected levy districts, what it means is that the commissioners of that levy district can decide to approve a 5 mil tax to pay for flood control projects without having to go to another vote of the people. So again, if you're in one of these 5 districts, you get one shot at deciding whether you want to authorize your levy district to raise your property taxes slightly keep you safe from hurricanes and other disasters, or maybe a little bit safer. Nobody is completely safe. So so that's what this does. But again, for the vast majority of people, and especially like the Orleans, it doesn't affect you. And so that's why I think, the decision really should rest with the people in those areas, like you said, Ashley.
No, certainly, certainly. And then too, I mean, I think that there's also something to be said about the whole state being able to weigh in on this, the taxes, small 5 areas in our state will have to pay. There's also, it's a little concerning, but again, consult your neighbors, talk to your family in South Louisiana, have a discussion about it, and certainly make up your mind about what works best for you and your family. Next slide. And I want to thank Taylor Hodges on our team, who's working our PowerPoint today, and she's been great in keeping us on task. Had a great playlist as well, and so thank you, Taylor. Amendment 4 says, do you support an amendment to increase the amount of allowable deficit reductions to statutory dedications and constitutionally protected funds from 5% to 10%? And a yes vote means that during times of projected budget deficits, protected budget items can be cut an additional 10% instead of 5%, allowing there to be more equitable budget cuts beyond higher education and healthcare. A no vote means that during times of projected budget deficits, budget items can be cut only 5%. Which is the current rate, often meaning unprotected items such as healthcare and higher ed may have their budgets reduced. And so, having read that out loud, I think, there's some language we've got to fix in that yes vote as well, because it would seem like it would be a little bit less. I mean, I think no matter what, this amendment I felt conflicted about, because I, again, feel like why are we legislating? Why are we legislating this through the state's constitution? I think it's also important to note that in case you didn't know, that the state's constitution, that everything is protected in particular, except for higher ed and healthcare. And so, so there's a lot to think about here. And Jan, as our budget expert, I will certainly open it up to you to kind of think about, like what are the implications of a yes and a no vote on this particular amendment?
Sure. Well, thanks, Ashley. I think this is one of those things that, you wish this didn't have to come down to a constitutional amendment. But the fact is that we have huge parts of our budget that are protected either by law or by the Constitution because somebody at some point decided they wanted to protect it. And a lot of this money is protected for good reasons. And some of these things, you may have some reason to say, no, that's not a good idea. For example, I mean, but there's money that kind of gets spent automatically or is automatically protected. And that means that when budgets have to be cut, the most vulnerable parts are typically higher education and parts of the healthcare budget. Not all parts of the Medicaid budget are unprotected. Nursing homes and hospitals, for example, enjoy a lot of protection of their particular rates, but home care services for people with disabilities or the elderly are always getting cut. And certain optional services, drug treatment programs, public health measures, and the Department of Social Services, child protective services, child care assistance, again, early care and education. These are the things that are always kind of getting cut when there are budget shortfalls. This amendment would really apply when we have mid-year budget shortfalls. And that happens when, the legislature builds a budget, they think they're going to get X amount of revenue, and then a recession sets in, and all of a sudden, you've got less money coming in than you thought, and you have more expenses than you thought. Maybe, because when recessions happen, people take their kids out of private school, put them in public school, education costs go up, demand for social services goes up. So the legislature has to come in and make mid-year budget cuts. If you remember the Bobby Jindal administration, every single December, it seems like we had to go up to the Joint Budget Committee and watch them make mid-year cuts to the budget. And anybody at LSU, probably is haunted by those memories, because that's when we cut a lot of money from higher education, a lot of, privatized the charity hospitals, we did all kinds of things. And when those mid-year deficits happen, the governor has a little bit of authority to cut on his own. But then once he gets above a certain threshold, the legislature has to sign off on it. But typically, they can cut into some of these protected funds, not all of them. Like you can't cut into the bond security and redemption fund. That's the money we use to pay back, bonds. You can't cut that because otherwise nobody would lend the state money anymore. But anyway, they're now allowed to cut up to 5% from certain protected funds. This amendment would essentially double that. From my perspective, I think that's probably a good idea because it reduces the chances that healthcare, social services, and higher education are going to be the only things getting cut. But still, it also means that some of these things that some legislators at some point in the past decided was so important that it had to be protected are now going to be more vulnerable to me. But again, the question really before voters is, do you want to spread the pain a little bit when there's budget shortfalls? The best way to avoid this is to pass a balanced budget that doesn't need to be cut in the middle of the year. But again, that's not always possible because nobody knows when the price of oil is going to tank or the economy is going to go into recession. So, but I think it's probably not a terrible idea to give the legislature a little bit more flexibility in times like that.
Yeah, no, and I think, that totally agree with you. And I have had more of those been a part of and sat in the room for more of those painful conversations than I care to around, these cuts. And then what is it meant for, certainly higher ed and healthcare and all of those critical programs that we know make a difference at the community level. I think, part of my question is, or one of the things that I do worry about, again, Ashley Sheldon, the citizen, but certainly also Ashley Sheldon, the advocate, is that also too, when given the discretion to cut more, right? Is it going to be in places where it could make a bigger difference and we can save those very social services that you talked about, Jan, or is it that, I just worry about is it going to be the sea turtles? Is it going to be, where are we going to cut? Where are we going to cut from, and worrying about the collective will of the legislative body to put the people of the state first, that we're always kind of, we're always fighting for that to be the case. But it is a fight. So I do, again, I feel like it's, I do think that I wish we could cut in other places. I just, again, it's like, should it be in the Constitution? Should it, should it be in the Constitution? I think that's one question. And then, will the legislature get it right when this time comes, or will it be the same old, and we'll just have less social services like, drug treatment beds and, and other critical services like home health care, and early ed. And so I think that, that's just my worry is that, will it be that, will it be social services and other things that, folks in community care about, or will it be us actually looking at, some of the places that have been protected for forever, but have an opportunity to, but that also too could take a 10% cut versus a 5% cut. And so, I have a question there, just as like I said, as a citizen and an advocate.
Yeah, no, that's, I think there's just one of those, I hate to say it, good arguments on both sides. And, again, and it doesn't mean that they have to cut from those protected funds. They would still have discretion. It just gives them that option when they're faced with a mid-year budget deficit. And again, we don't know when they're going to come. What we do know, they will be back at some point because the economy never does exactly what we think it's going to do. So sometimes they just and we have one thing about our Constitution is we have a balanced budget requirement. So when there's a shortfall, they have to bring the budget back into balance.
No, and I think too that, in the very short and kind of probably the midterm, right, we've got federal COVID dollars, through American Rescue Plan. We've got, certainly we're still, waiting on the full extent of what the federal funding will be for Hurricane Ida. And that certainly, that'll boost and buoy the economy for some time, but there does come that moment where we see the leveling off of that. And then, again, like I said, I worry, but I think you're right. Like there's, arguments on both sides, and we shall see. Well, guys, that brings us to the end of of the amendments. There'll be four, like I said, there'll be these four amendments. It's up to you to make that choice, but we never take an election off. We are asking everyone to take it seriously and take a minute to go vote. This is our state's governing document. And it's critical, especially as it is the most amended constitution in the country right now, that we really think about what we're amending and why we're amending it, and ensure that your voice is heard. And so let's do that. And I think that in the past, it's been really interesting to watch the trends around these constitutional amendments, and and folks have been standing up and having their voices heard. But to Jan's point, very early on in our discussion tonight, this is one of the few things on the ballot in many places, with New Orleans being the kind of major exception. Again, Baton Rouge does have some judgeships. You've got some other things happening in a couple of other places in the state, but this is going to be one of those few things. And so is it enough to bring people out? And we hope it is. We hope to see you at the polls. Again, election day is November 13th. Early voting is October 30th through November 6th. Ensure that your voice is heard. If you have questions, you can see that our websites, both powercoalition.org and labudget.org, we both have our constitutional amendment explainers available. Jan also mentioned PAR, Public Affairs Research Council, also did an explainer. And so just want to make sure that all the resources that are out there, but we are always grateful for those that tune in. Appreciate your time. Hope this has been helpful. I want to thank Jan and Devontae for joining us tonight. Jan, you are always a wealth of knowledge. I am always grateful for your voice in the room, and for always sharing your knowledge with us and helping us really, helping us understand what's the way to get to a better state of Louisiana. I always, tease people that everything I love is in this place. And even I tease, but it's actually the truest thing I say is that everything I love is in this place. And so making sure that we have a strong state and a strong state budget and a strong constitution are important to me because, my parents are here, my siblings are here. And so I fight, and I'm always happy to be able to stand and fight shoulder to shoulder with folks like Jan and the other partners that anchor the Power Coalition table. And so again, thank you for joining us tonight. We are right on time. It's a miracle. I always talk too long. But I would love, Jan, if you have a few few words, I'd love to give you a chance to say goodbye as well.
I just want to thank you, Ashley, for everything you do, for being such an amazing partner, friend, confidant, and for all you do for the people of Louisiana and the groups at the table who are working together to build power. It's always an honor to share a microphone or a Zoom screen with you. And yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity. I hope everybody goes out to vote. Again, the cool thing about a low turnout election is your vote counts a lot more than it did last November because there are fewer of you. So tell your neighbors, tell your friends, go to our website, read up, go to the Power Coalition website, educate yourself. It's still an important election. In many ways, it could really affect everybody's pocketbook and the shape of the state we're going to have, not just next year, but for years to come. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Well, I'll right back at you, Jan. Thank you so much for all you do. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership. And we'll be back soon, I'm sure, to talk about redistricting. So I look forward to it, and everyone have a good night. And again, visit our website at powercoalition.org, as well as labudget.org. And you can see all of our social media handles, and certainly reach out to our teams if you have additional questions. Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thanks again.
Thanks again. Bye, guys.